Can you believe that a single moment, one small, simple action, could transform an entire company and heal a broken family? Let me tell you my story, and how it all began on what seemed like just another ordinary morning. I never imagined that my first days at Aurora Media Group would make me feel so small. Aurora was one of the biggest media companies in Boston, a place where people moved with purpose, voices overlapping, meetings happening back to back under the glow of bright, unrelenting lights. Every morning, as I stood in the massive lobby with its towering glass ceiling, I felt like a tiny speck in a rushing crowd, a shadow barely noticeable in the chaos. As an intern, my job wasn't glamorous. I brewed coffee, made photocopies, set up conference rooms, wiped down whiteboards, endless little tasks no one really saw or cared about. I always arrived early to make sure everything was ready, but no one seemed to notice, and certainly no one said my name. Sometimes I wondered, if I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone even realize I was gone? When I first walked through Aurora's doors, I had been full of hope. Back in school, I was top of my class, ambitious, determined, ready to build a real career in media, but only a few months here had chipped away at that confidence. To my colleagues, I wasn't a person with ideas or dreams. I was just the coffee girl. Little by little, I learned to stay quiet, to shrink into the background, to let myself blend into the blur of people rushing past me. During lunch breaks, I often sat alone in the corner of the break room, listening to the laughter and chatter of groups that never invited me to join. Sometimes they didn't even look up when I walked by, as if I wasn't there at all. The feeling of being invisible grew heavier each day, wrapping around me like a fog I couldn't escape. Every time I stepped out of the elevator, walking past the giant posters of Aurora's most successful campaigns, I reminded myself why I stayed. Aurora wasn't just a company to me. It was the place where I hoped, one day, I'd get the chance to prove I belonged. For now, I was just a shadow, one nameless face in a sea of employees. But deep down, I held on to the fragile belief that someday, somehow, everything would change. What I didn't know was that moment was closer than I could have ever imagined, and it would all begin on what seemed like just another ordinary morning. The exhausting afternoons at Aurora often made me want to rush home, shut the door behind me, and forget the world outside. But the moment I stepped into our small apartment, my heart would soften. Lucas, my little brother, would run straight to the door, wrapping his tiny arms around me as if he'd been waiting for that moment all day. Lucas was only 9 years old, with big round eyes and the brightest smile I'd ever seen. But he had never heard a single sound in his life. Lucas was born deaf. From the day he came into this world, my family had to learn to communicate in a completely different way. I still remember those early days vividly. My mom desperately trying to figure out what Lucas wanted, making random gestures while he cried in frustration, unable to express himself. I was only 14 at the time, but something inside me knew I had to help. That was when I made the decision to learn American Sign Language. At first it was overwhelming, so many hand shapes, movements, and expressions. But I practiced every day, one sign at a time. Slowly, Lucas and I built our own rhythm of communication, a private world where we understood each other completely. Lucas became my anchor through all of life's storms. No matter how invisible I felt at Aurora, no matter how many failures or disappointments I faced, one look at his smile could make all the heaviness in my chest disappear. Sometimes he would sign to me, "You're my hero." And every single time, my throat tightened, my heart overflowing with emotions I couldn't put into words. I'll never forget one particular night. The rest of the family was asleep, and it was just Lucas and me, sitting at the small desk under the warm glow of a lamp. His expression turned serious as he signed, "One day, you'll help people like me, won't you?" I took his tiny hands in mine and nodded firmly. "I promise." That promise became a quiet flame inside me, one that never went out. I didn't know when or how, but I believed that someday I'd get the chance to use my ASL skills to make a real difference. What I couldn't have known was that this promise was about to be tested on a morning that began like any other, but would change everything forever. That morning began like any other, with the rich smell of coffee filling Aurora's main lobby, and the sharp rhythm of footsteps echoing off the polished marble floor. Employees rushed in and out, murmuring about upcoming meetings and looming deadlines, the entire building humming like a massive machine running at full speed. I stood near the reception desk, clutching a stack of documents I needed to deliver to the marketing department, carefully pressing myself against the wall to stay out of everyone's way. Then, something caught my attention. Amid the bustling crowd, an elderly man with silver hair stood frozen, his expression filled with panic. He turned in circles, eyes wide, desperately trying to speak to the people around him. But no one stopped. A few glanced his way before quickly moving on, probably assuming he was just a lost visitor. I watched closely and noticed him start to move his hands, gesturing almost frantically. But no one understood. The cacophony of ringing phones, hurried conversations, and pounding footsteps drowned him out completely, leaving him trapped in a world that wouldn't listen. The more he tried to sign, the more distressed he became. His hands moved faster, sharper, his face etched with helplessness. My heart pounded. I recognized those movements instantly. ASL, American Sign Language, the very same language I'd been using with Lucas for years. My fingers tightened around the stack of papers as conflicting thoughts swirled inside me. Part of me wanted to rush forward and help him. The other part screamed to stay invisible, to keep my head down like always, to avoid breaking the unspoken rule that interns should never draw attention to themselves. But when I looked into his eyes and saw raw fear and desperation, I knew deep down that if I didn't act, no one else would. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around the crowded lobby. Everyone was still rushing past, too busy, too distracted to notice the man's desperate plea for help. It felt like the entire world had decided to turn its back on him, and for a second, I almost did the same. Almost. I drew in a shaky breath, clutching the papers to my chest before slowly setting them down on the reception desk. My legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to move, but somehow, I willed them forward. Each step felt louder than the chaos around me, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I finally reached him, I knelt slightly so we were at eye level. I raised my hands and began to sign slowly, clearly. "It's okay. I can understand you." The change in his face was instant and profound. Panic melted into relief, and his shoulders sagged as if a great weight had been lifted. Tears welled in his eyes as he signed back, hands trembling. You understand me? Thank you. Thank you." "Yes," I signed back, nodding with a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe. Tell me what's wrong." For the first time, he was able to express himself. The flurry of his hands told a story of confusion and frustration. He had come here with something important to say, but no one would stop to listen. And in a building as overwhelming as Aurora, where everything moved so fast, he had simply disappeared in plain sight. As we communicated, I became aware of the growing stillness around us. A few employees had finally stopped to watch, whispering among themselves, their eyes widening at the sight of me using ASL. It was like a small bubble of quiet had formed in the middle of the storm. In that moment, something shifted inside me. For so long, I had been invisible here, unseen, unheard. But now, here I was, standing out for the very thing that had always set me apart. For the first time since joining Aurora, I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt needed, and that feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't know it yet, but stepping forward that day would set everything else in motion. Samuel's hands moved slower now, his breathing steadying as he signed to me. His initial panic had faded, replaced by an urgency that gripped my chest. I focused on every gesture, every subtle movement of his fingers, determined not to miss a single detail. "I came here," he signed carefully, "because this company, it's mine. I built Aurora with my own hands years ago." I froze, my mind stumbling over his words. For a second, I wondered if I had misunderstood him. His company? Samuel's eyes glistened with a mixture of pride and pain as he continued. "My son, Ethan. He runs it now, CEO. His hands trembled, and he paused, swallowing hard before finishing. "We haven't spoken in years. I just wanted to see how it's doing. To see him." The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Ethan Morgan. The Ethan everyone here treated like a distant, untouchable figure. The same Ethan whose decisions shaped every corner of Aurora. And this man, standing in front of me, wasn't just some lost visitor. He was the founder of the entire company and the CEO's father. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just about helping a stranger anymore. This was delicate, complicated, something far beyond my role as an intern. I need to let someone know you're here, I signed, my hands trembling slightly. Samuel nodded, though his eyes pleaded with me to be quick. I hurried over to the receptionist and told her to contact Ethan's assistant immediately. She barely looked up, muttering, "He's in a meeting. They'll have to wait." Wait? My pulse spiked. Samuel had come back after years away, and they wanted him to wait like everyone else? As I glanced back at Samuel's weary face, a wave of protectiveness surged through me. I didn't know how, but I had to make sure he was heard. This was only the beginning, and somehow, I was now part of it. I stood there, heart pounding, as Samuel lowered his hands in defeat. The energy that had filled him moments ago seemed to drain away, leaving him looking smaller, older, almost fragile. Around us, the lobby buzzed with activity, but it felt like there was a wall between this man and the company he had built with his own hands. No one came. No one cared. I clenched my fists. The receptionist's indifferent words, "He'll have to wait," echoed in my head like a cruel joke. This wasn't some random visitor looking for directions. This was Samuel Morgan, the founder of Aurora Media Group, standing in the middle of his own legacy and being treated like a stranger. I glanced at Samuel again. His eyes searched the room, full of hurt and confusion, and for a brief second, they met mine. That was all it took. Something inside me shifted. I couldn't leave him standing there. "Come with me," I signed to him, my movements careful but decisive. His brows lifted in surprise, and then slowly, he nodded. Relief flickered across his face, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. My pulse raced as I turned toward the elevators. I wasn't supposed to do this. Interns didn't just walk VIPs around the building without permission. If anyone caught me, I'd probably be fired on the spot. But as we walked side by side, something deeper than fear guided me forward. The elevator doors slid open, and I gestured for Samuel to step in first. As they closed behind us, sealing us off from the chaos of the lobby, I realized I had just crossed an invisible line. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was involved. And as we ascended floor by floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that this single choice, to step forward, to act, was going to change more than just my day. It might change everything. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and we stepped into one of Aurora's main office floors. Samuel paused for a moment, taking in the space with a mixture of nostalgia and uncertainty. His gaze swept over the sleek glass walls and spotless floors, but I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just seeing what was there. He was seeing memories of what this place used to be. As we walked through the hallways, I signed small explanations for him. "This is the marketing department. Over there is the design team." He nodded, smiling faintly at first, though his shoulders stayed tense. I began to notice things I'd never really paid attention to before. The layout seemed modern and efficient until I looked through Samuel's eyes. Desks were crammed too close together, narrow walkways barely wide enough for someone using a wheelchair. Important notices were pinned high on bulletin boards where someone shorter or someone with vision challenges might never see them. When Samuel tried to interact with employees, the gaps became even more painfully clear. A young designer smiled politely but froze, unsure how to respond to Samuel's signs. She looked at me helplessly, whispering, I don't know what he's saying." I translated, and Samuel's face lit up when she finally understood and signed back a simple, "Hello." It was such a small thing, yet the joy on his face was heartbreaking. But not every interaction went well. We passed a group of employees huddled near the break room. One of them muttered under their breath, not realizing I could hear, "Why's this old guy wandering around like he owns the place?" My chest tightened. If only they knew. I glanced at Samuel, praying he hadn't caught the tone of their voices, but the flicker of pain in his eyes told me he had. That was the moment it truly sank in. Aurora wasn't ready for someone like Samuel. For years, I'd been so focused on surviving my own invisibility here that I hadn't noticed how the company itself had been turning a blind eye to anyone who didn't fit neatly into its mold. And Samuel, he felt it with every step. I prefer this response. I led Samuel into a small, unused conference room tucked away at the end of the hallway. The glass walls were frosted, muffling the noise of the bustling office outside. It felt like stepping into another world, a quiet space where finally he could breathe. Samuel eased into a chair, shoulders heavy as though carrying decades of memories. I sat across from him, my hands ready to translate. He looked at me for a long moment before signing slowly, his movements deliberate, full of emotion. "This company," he signed, pausing as his chest rose and fell, "was my dream. I built Aurora from nothing, brick by brick. It wasn't just about profit, it was about people. I wanted a place where creativity and compassion could thrive together." His hands trembled slightly as he continued. "But my son, Ethan, saw things differently. To him, growth was everything. Expansion, numbers, dominance. We started to clash. At first, it was small arguments. Then, it became war." I swallowed hard, watching as his story unfolded through the fluid dance of his hands. "One night," he signed, his face shadowed with pain, "we had a terrible fight. I told him I couldn't watch him destroy what we had built. He told me he didn't need me anymore." Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line as his movement slowed. "So I left. I thought maybe someday he would come find me, but years passed. Nothing." His gaze dropped to his hands, and for a moment, the proud founder I'd imagined disappeared, leaving behind a father grieving the loss of his son. My throat tightened. "You came back today to see him?" I signed softly. He nodded. "To see if there was anything left to save. To see if my son still remembered me." Before I could respond, a shadow flickered outside the frosted glass. I didn't notice it at first, but Samuel's eyes darted past me, sharp with recognition. Someone was there. Unbeknownst to us, Ethan stood in the hallway, watching. His expression was unreadable, his body still, except for the faint clench of his jaw. He said nothing, didn't enter the room, just watched in silence as his father's story spilled out, unheard by anyone else. The storm was coming, and none of us were ready. As Samuel and I stepped out of the quiet conference room, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because we had finally managed to talk, to let him share the weight he'd been carrying for so many years. Dread because deep down, I knew what we'd done wasn't exactly allowed. I was just an intern. Walking the founder of Aurora through the building without permission was risky, dangerous even. My fears were confirmed the moment we turned the corner. Linda, my supervisor, stood at the far end of the hallway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her sharp heels clicked against the floor as she strode toward us, her face twisted into a scowl. Linda was known for being strict, but I had never seen her look this furious before. "Emily!" she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "What on earth do you think you're doing? You've been missing from your station for almost an hour!" I froze, my mouth opening and closing without sound. Samuel looked between us, confusion flickering across his features. He couldn't hear the words, but he could feel the hostility radiating off Linda. I raised my hand slightly, trying to explain. "Linda, please, this isn't what it looks like. He's not just what?" She interrupted, stepping closer. "Some random visitor you decided to parade around the office? This is completely unacceptable. You don't have the authority to do this. Do you realize how much trouble you've caused?" Samuel's eyes darted from my face to hers, his body tense. He didn't need to understand the language to know he was at the center of the conflict. His hands moved nervously, signing to me. "What's happening? Did I do something wrong?" My heart ached. "No," I signed back quickly. "It's not you, it's me." But even as I reassured him, I felt the situation spiraling out of control. Linda reached for Samuel's arm, as if to pull him away, and in that tense, breathless moment, I knew something was about to explode. Before I could react, Linda's hand was already closing around Samuel's sleeve, Samuel jerked back in alarm, his eyes wide, his hands flying up in frantic gestures I barely caught. "Please don't!" I shouted, stepping between them. "He's not just some visitor. You don't understand." But Linda's face hardened. "Emily, step aside. You've caused enough trouble for one day. If you don't want to lose this internship, you'll stay out of this right now." Her tone was final, cold, and it sent a chill down my spine. Samuel looked terrified. He didn't know exactly what was being said, but his body trembled as if he could feel the anger around him. His hands moved rapidly, signing to me. "Emily, what's happening? Why are they angry?" My throat tightened. I wanted to answer, to calm him, but everything was moving too fast. Linda was tugging harder, and Samuel stumbled. That was when a deep, commanding voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough!" The single word froze everyone in place. I turned, and my breath caught. Ethan Morgan. He stood at the end of the hall, tall and imposing, his presence like a storm contained within a single man. Until now, I had only seen him in pictures and at company-wide meetings where he never noticed me. Seeing him up close was overwhelming. The sharp lines of his face, the piercing intensity of his eyes. "Sir!" Linda's tone shifted instantly, her grip on Samuel's arm dropping. I was just..." Ethan raised a hand, silencing her without a word. His gaze shifted to me, then to Samuel, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. His jaw tightened, his chest rising with controlled breaths. "Step back," he ordered, his voice calm but unyielding. Linda obeyed immediately, retreating a few steps, her earlier anger melting into nervous silence. My pulse raced as Ethan walked toward us, each step deliberate, powerful. For a fleeting second, I couldn't tell if he was about to explode, or if something entirely different was about to happen. One thing was certain, nothing about this moment was going to go the way I expected. Ethan stopped just a few feet away, his towering presence filling the narrow hallway. The tension was so thick, it felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the space. I stood frozen, Samuel trembling beside me, while Linda lingered awkwardly in the background, clearly unsure whether to stay or flee. For a long, breathless moment, Ethan didn't speak. His gaze moved slowly from Samuel to me and back again. I couldn't read his expression. Anger, shock, sorrow. It was all there, tangled together. Then, to my astonishment, Ethan raised his hands. The movements were hesitant at first, as if his muscles were rusty, unsure. But there was no mistaking what he was doing. ASL, American Sign Language. Samuel's breath hitched audibly. His eyes widened, and tears immediately welled up. He hadn't expected this. None of us had. Ethan's hands formed deliberate, shaky signs. "Dad, I'm sorry." The world seemed to tilt around me. Samuel staggered back a step, his lips trembling as his own hands rose to answer. You remember how to sign?" Ethan nodded, his throat working. His next signs were firmer, faster, almost desperate. "I never forgot. I didn't know how to come back. I thought if I stayed silent long enough, maybe the anger would fade." Samuel's tears spilled over as he replied with trembling hands. "All I ever wanted was to see you, to know you still cared." Ethan's hands stilled for a moment before forming the words that seemed to shatter the years between them. "I do. I've always cared. I just didn't know how to show it." I stood there, throat tight, heart pounding, watching a father and son bridge an ocean of silence without a single spoken word. The room faded away. The buzzing lights, the sterile walls, even Linda's presence, all of it disappeared, leaving only them. Then, with a broken sob, Samuel reached forward. Ethan stepped into his father's embrace, wrapping his arms tightly around him. Samuel clung to his son like a drowning man to a lifeline, his shoulders shaking with years of pent-up grief. For the first time since stepping into Aurora, I wasn't invisible. I was a witness to something sacred, something that felt like it had been waiting a lifetime to happen. Samuel's sobs were muffled against Ethan's chest, his hands still trembling as he gripped his son's shoulders. Ethan held him tightly, his eyes shut, as if afraid that if he let go, his father would vanish again. The years of bitterness and silence between them seemed to dissolve in that single embrace. I stood just a few steps away, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. My chest ached with a mixture of relief and awe. Only minutes ago, this hallway had been filled with chaos, anger, and misunderstanding. Now, it felt like sacred ground. Linda shifted behind me, clearly moved but unsure of what to do. She had always seemed so unshakable, yet now she remained quiet, her earlier fury completely gone. Even she understood that this was not a moment to interrupt. After what felt like an eternity, Samuel finally pulled back, tears streaming down his face. His hands moved weakly at first, then with more strength as he signed to Ethan.
"I thought I'd lost you forever."
Ethan swallowed hard, his voice breaking as he spoke aloud while signing at the same time. "You never lost me, Dad. I just didn't know how to come home." Samuel's face crumpled, and another sob escaped his lips, this one softer, more fragile. Ethan gently wiped his father's tears with his thumb, his own eyes glistening. I felt my own vision blur, and I blinked rapidly, determined to stay composed. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a reconciliation between father and son. It was the rebirth of something much larger. Ethan turned toward me then. For a heartbeat, I feared he might be angry, that he would demand answers or reprimand me for stepping out of my role. Instead, he met my gaze steadily and gave a small, deliberate nod. It wasn't just gratitude. It was recognition. For so long, I had been invisible at Aurora, a silent shadow. But in that nod, Ethan saw me, truly saw me. And as Samuel leaned on his son for support, I knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger journey, one that none of us could face alone. The next morning, the atmosphere at Aurora felt completely different. The usual rush of footsteps and chatter was still there, but beneath it ran a quiet undercurrent, like the whole building was holding its breath after what had happened yesterday. Everywhere I went, I caught glimpses of curious stares. People didn't ask questions, but I could feel them whispering after I passed. Ethan's assistant approached me mid-morning, her tone unusually polite. "Mr. Morgan would like to see you in his office." My heart jumped. For a moment, my legs refused to move. Yesterday, I had been invisible. Today, I was being summoned by the CEO himself. I smoothed my trembling hands against my skirt and followed her up to the top floor. Ethan's office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Sunlight streamed in, but the room felt strangely solemn, like a place where heavy decisions were made. Ethan stood by the window with his back to me, hands clasped behind him. Samuel wasn't there. It was just the two of us. "Emily," he said without turning, his voice calm but low. "Sit down, please." I obeyed, my pulse pounding in my ears. When he finally turned to face me, his expression wasn't the cold, intimidating mask I'd always imagined. There was exhaustion there, and something softer. "What you witnessed yesterday." He paused, taking a deep breath. "It opened my eyes in a way I wasn't prepared for." I stayed silent, letting him speak. For years, I've been so focused on growth, on numbers, charts, expansion, that I stopped seeing the people behind it all. I thought I was building a legacy, but my father walked away from this company because I lost sight of what really matters. His voice caught slightly on the word, father. He continued, more firmly this time. "Yesterday, watching you communicate with him, it forced me to see what Aurora has been missing. Accessibility, inclusion, simple human connection. Things we should have been leading in, we've been failing at instead." My throat tightened. I had noticed those gaps before, but hearing the CEO admit it out loud felt monumental. Ethan's gaze locked on mine. "I can't change the past, but I can change what comes next. And I believe you, Emily, are the person who can help me do it." The weight of his words pressed down on me. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about one reunion or one family. It was about reshaping an entire company, and somehow, he believed I was part of that future. For a moment, I could only stare at Ethan, unsure if I had heard him correctly. Me? The invisible intern who spent her days brewing coffee and sorting papers? My mouth went dry, and I shook my head slightly, unable to form words. Ethan must have sensed my disbelief because he stepped closer, his tone steady but earnest. "I know it sounds sudden, but yesterday proved something to me. You saw my father when no one else did. You understood him when even I couldn't. His voice cracked almost imperceptibly before he steadied it again. You didn't just help him. You gave him back his voice. I swallowed hard, my thoughts spiraling. The idea of taking on a leadership role was overwhelming, almost laughable. I don't know if I'm qualified for something like that, I finally whispered. I'm just an intern. I've never managed a team, let alone shaped company policy. Ethan shook his head. What Aurora needs right now isn't just another executive with a fancy resume. It needs someone who truly understands the barriers people face, someone who cares. He paused, searching my face. That's you, Emily. He walked behind his desk, then turned a sleek folder toward me. I want you to become our Director of Accessibility and Inclusion. It's a new role, one with real authority and resources. You'll have the power to make lasting changes, physical spaces, technology, training, everything. But more than that, you'll help rewrite Aurora's culture. The room seemed to tilt around me. My mind flashed back to Lucas, to his small hands signing. One day, you'll help people like me. This was that moment. But fear clawed at me. What if I failed? What if everyone saw me as a fraud, an overreaching intern who didn't belong? Ethan seemed to read my hesitation. You don't have to have all the answers right now, he said gently. Just bring the same courage you showed yesterday. We'll figure out the rest together. I closed my eyes, letting his words settle. When I opened them, I saw Lucas's face in my mind, bright and hopeful. Slowly, I reached for the folder. My hand still trembled, but my voice was steady as I said, Yes, I'll do it. Ethan's expression softened with relief and pride. Welcome to your new beginning, Emily. And in that instant, I realized it wasn't just a new role. It was the start of a revolution for Aurora and for me. 6 months later, I stood in the same lobby where everything had begun, the same place where Samuel had once been lost in the noise, unseen and unheard. But today, it felt like an entirely different world. The first thing I noticed was the sound, or rather, the balance of it. The chaotic clamor that used to overwhelm this space had been replaced by something softer, more intentional. Clear digital displays now lined the walls, flashing updates with captions and visual cues. Wide ramps curved alongside the staircases, and the elevators announced each floor in both voice and text. Even the lighting felt warmer, more welcoming. As I walked through the lobby, I saw small changes that spoke volumes. A receptionist greeted a visitor using basic ASL, her hands a little clumsy but full of effort. Nearby, a new employee guided a visually impaired colleague to a meeting room, chatting easily as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I swallowed a lump in my throat. These weren't just improvements on a checklist. They were signs that Aurora was truly becoming a place where everyone could belong. Emily! A familiar voice signed excitedly behind me. I turned to see Lucas bounding toward me, his face glowing. He had grown taller in just half a year, but his smile was exactly the same. Samuel followed at a slower pace, his proud eyes taking in the changes all around him. Today was special. It wasn't just a normal tour. For the first time, I was showing my little brother and Samuel what we had built together. As we moved through the halls, I explained each new feature, signing for Lucas while speaking for Samuel. We visited redesigned workspaces with adjustable desks and open layouts. We explored break rooms where every table had easy access for wheelchairs, and even the vending machines had tactile labels. Lucas kept stopping to try things out, his hands flying as he signed his amazement. Samuel's eyes shimmered with emotion, his smile wide and unrestrained. Watching their reactions, something inside me shifted. This was no longer just about policies and construction projects. This was about lives being changed, about people who had once felt invisible finally being seen. As I stood between Samuel and Lucas, pride swelled in my chest. 6 months ago, I was just a shadow in this company. Now, I was standing in the light, watching Aurora transform into the place it was always meant to be. Change didn't just happen in the walls or the technology. It happened in the people. When I first started at Aurora, the hallways were full of hurried footsteps and blank stares. People rushed past each other, focused only on deadlines and numbers. No one truly saw one another. But now, as I walked through those same halls, there was a different energy. Warmth, connection, even laughter. Employees had started learning ASL on their own, some meeting in small groups before work or during lunch breaks to practice together. In the mornings, it wasn't unusual to see two people greeting each other with careful, earnest hand movements, smiling as they signed a simple, "Good morning." During meetings, captions scrolled smoothly across the bottom of presentation screens. Interpreters sat at the front, ensuring no one was left out of the conversation. More importantly, I noticed subtle shifts in behavior. People slowing down to check if a colleague needed help, asking thoughtful questions, listening with genuine attention. The story of Samuel and Ethan had spread through the company like wildfire. Employees whispered about that day in the hallway, how the CEO himself had signed to his father for the first time in years. It became a symbol, a reminder that Aurora was more than just a media empire. It was a family trying to heal, to grow, to do better. Even the company's external reputation began to change. Articles praised Aurora for its groundbreaking accessibility initiatives. Competitors sent teams to tour our facilities, eager to learn from our model. For the first time, Aurora wasn't just a leader in media. It was a leader in humanity. One afternoon, I passed by a group of interns huddled together, practicing signs with a deaf coworker who was patiently teaching them. They didn't notice me watching, and that was okay. I didn't need recognition. Seeing their joy was enough. As I stood there, a wave of emotion crashed over me. 6 months ago, I had been the invisible one, the girl no one noticed, the intern who blended into the background. Now, I wasn't just visible. I was part of something far greater than myself. Aurora had transformed, and so had I. For the first time, I believed in my own voice and in the voices of all the people who had once been silent. Together, we had built not just a company, but a community. The ballroom shimmered under warm golden lights. A sea of faces gathered to witness the annual National Inclusion Awards. Banners hung proudly from the ceiling, bearing words like accessibility, innovation, and community. I stood off stage with Samuel and Ethan, my hands trembling slightly as applause rippled through the crowd. 6 months ago, I was the invisible intern no one noticed. Now, I was moments away from stepping into a spotlight I'd never dared to imagine. Ethan's hand rested lightly on my shoulder.
You deserve this, Emily,
he said, his voice low but firm.
Aurora wouldn't be what it is today without you.
Before I could reply, the announcer's voice rang out, introducing Aurora Media Group as the recipient of the evening's highest honor. The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Ethan walked to the podium first. His speech was brief, humble.
This award isn't about me,
he said, his eyes sweeping the room before settling on Samuel.
It's about a vision that began decades ago, and the people who had the courage to bring it back to life.
He paused, then extended his hand toward us. Please welcome my father, Samuel Morgan, and the woman who made this transformation possible, Emily Parker. My breath caught as Samuel and I stepped onto the stage. The crowd roared, but for a moment, all I could see was Samuel's face, shining with tears and pride. The award was placed in my hands, cool and heavy. My voice trembled as I spoke. When I started at Aurora, I felt invisible, but then I thought of my little brother, Lucas, who has been deaf since birth. I learned sign language so he would never feel unseen. Yesterday, I promised him that one day, I'd help others the way I helped him. Tonight, standing here, I know that promise has been kept. As I finished, Lucas stood in the front row, his small hands moving in perfect, graceful signs. I'm proud of you. Tears filled my eyes. Beside me, Samuel and Ethan clasped hands, their bond renewed. And in that shining moment, I understood. A single act of courage could ripple outward, transforming not just one company, but countless lives. It all began with a choice, to see someone others had overlooked.